Well, as I mentioned, we are broadcasting here at the Farm Progress Show site this day ahead of the Farm Progress Show. We are broadcasting from the Agritain Koch Agronomic Services booth, and they'll have a lot of information here, as you heard from Martin Case a few moments ago, and a lot of it has to do, centered around the research done at the University of Illinois by Dr. Fred Below and Adam Henniger, who are both with us now. We've talked a lot about this in the past, about these 7 wonders of the corn yield world, and the chances, or the possibilities, and the expectations of being able to hit 300 bushel corn, which they tell us is very, very doable. And we'll start with you, Fred. This sounds like almost hard to imagine 300 bushel corn when farmers are looking out in their fields this year after a drought year, and some of them having hardly, maybe next to nothing. So, but 300 is still out there, isn't it? Still that goal.
It's still the goal. It seems a little ludicrous to be talking about those lofty yields and when farmers have a lot less, but guess what? There's still more people, and there's still a need to be able to produce that level. And so what we need to do is we need to learn how to do it, especially when the weather is challenging.
What have we learned from this drought year?
Well, we certainly reiterated the fact that weather rules, and that's the factor that we have to control. And what we've seen this year is that you really have to plan for high yields, and you have to manage that crop right from the very beginning. You have to plant more seed of the best hybrid in that fertile ground, and then she's all downhill. And what we see this year is the well-managed crop. Your yield was made in April and May before the yield went south. And that's the key. You can't give up on management and make up for it later.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talked about this earlier. A year like this is unforgiving. If you made mistakes with your management plan, it's really going to show.
It really does show, and it really shows the advantage of good management. And in all honesty, I'm really surprised at how well the crop took this heat and drought. It really amazes me. It shows you the value of today's genetics and the value of the technology that we have to manage that genetics. And a lot of farmers are going to have a higher yield than they actually think.
Yeah, a lot of comparisons are made to 1988 and other drought years, but I can't help but wonder, with the year we had this year, what kind of crop would we have had if we didn't have the technology that we have today?
Yeah, I can only imagine as well, because there's a lot of comparisons back to 1988, and we didn't have the biotech insect protection, we didn't have the precision placement, and I think we'd be looking at a real disaster if we had that kind of genetics and management that we had then and facing the weather we had now.
Okay, I want to get into the research that you've done this year. You and Adam have been involved in this, and getting back to the 7 wonders of the corn yield world, and what have we learned as we're still striving to achieve that 300 bushel corn?
Well, we've learned that we really need to get each of the 7 wonders right. The key to high yields is to know those factors that each year have a positive and large impact on yield, and make sure that you manage them to their fullest extent. And so what we're doing is we're combining as many of the optimized wonders as we can. We're trying to achieve positive interactions of them, and that's the key to really getting squeaking out a few extra bushels.
So tell us what you did this year, and then we'll bring in Adam to kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of some of this.
Well, this year we've discovered that fertility is a huge aspect of crop management, and what we've done is we've made sure that we put that seed right in that fertile band, and we made sure that we've gotten the right hybrids at the right population, and we've committed to it. We made sure we had weed-free conditions. We made sure we protected that crop. High yield is not by accident. You have to plan for it, and that's what we're really seeing this year, Mike.
And Adam, we get down to it, weather and nitrogen are key to achieving those yields.
Most definitely. Weather and nitrogen are the #1 and #2 factors that influence your yield in a positive, and unfortunately this year we're seeing somewhat of a negative impact of some of those interactions, but they are crucial to corn yields every year, and we're seeing that this year is really pointing out the differences we see in treatment effects between good management decisions that interact well with weather and nitrogen, and poor situations that the weather has really capped the capability of our nitrogen management treatments.
Well, let's talk about what are good management decisions that need to be made.
Well, Fred has already touched on a few of them, weather and nitrogen being the #1 and #2 factors. Getting that seed in good proximity and having nitrogen available to that plant early on in the growing season, when we actually were trying to maintain as much of our yield potential as we could was crucial. And as we found out later on in the season, a lot of that nitrogen, even though it may have been plant available, the plant didn't have enough moisture to always capitalize on our good management practices.
Nitrogen management is really a key here, isn't it?
Most definitely. Nitrogen is very mobile in the soil, and it's a nutrient that really needs a lot of attention as far as timings, placements, different technologies that are out there with different chemical formulations, that farmers can put together a package using those different aspects of nitrogen and try and improve their crop yields.
Fred, we've seen, and I know you've talked a lot about this in the past, products like Agritane, Agritane Plus stabilizers are so important to getting the full potential out of nitrogen management and the corn plant.
Yeah, you can't have weather-induced nitrogen loss and grow high yields. And what we've seen and what farmers don't realize is a 230 bushel corn crop in a 3-week period between V12 and R1, essentially the 3rd week of June to the 2nd week of July. That crop has to take up more than 7 pounds of N per day for 3 straight weeks. That's when you're making the photosynthetic machinery of the crop. And boy, if you lose N or don't have it available and you don't take up that 7 pounds every day, you have set yourself back on yield. So it really rams home how important it is to make sure the nitrogen is available to the crop when the crop needs it.
Adam, we're learning more and more about, maybe we used to think if you get off to a slow start, you can make it up later in the season if all goes well. But what we're seeing and hearing more and more is what you lose sometimes early on, you can't get back.
Most definitely. We've found that yield potential is best when the seed is in the bag, and as soon as you put that seed in the ground, your yield potential is starting on its way down. And anything that we can do to try to protect our yield potential from Mother Nature and all the pests, insects, so on and so forth, that we try to address in our management processes, our management programs, those are the things that we're most concerned about with our approach.
Talking with Dr. Fred Below and Adam Henniger from the University of Illinois. All right, there'll be a lot of decisions made, or maybe not made as soon as they normally would, if we don't start getting some moisture this fall and into the winter. Fred, what do you think that's going to do? I mean, as far as putting a lot of pressure come next spring, a lot of things put off till then.
Well, yeah, people have to really know what they want to do, and they may not have their first choice, especially with nitrogen management. So when you push it on to the spring, you might not be able to incorporate it. You really need to be thinking about how you're going to manage it.
So again, like we said, it seems strange to talk about 300 bushel corn. You're coming off a drought year, but there's going to be even more emphasis put on next year's crop coming out of this year's shortened crop. So how do we plan? How do we prepare to try to get to that 300 bushel level?
Well, I think we need to sort of stay the course and do some of the same things that we know are effective. We can't be discouraged by a poor year. And if you look historically, a good year usually follows a poor year. So that's the good news. Once again, you still have to plan every year and look at each year individually. And if you think about high crop management, it's either planning for what the weather gives you or trying to plan around the weather. And that's exactly where we're going to be next year as well.
Adam, your thoughts on what farmers should be thinking about going into next year?
I think Fred hit it home. I think they need to have a positive attitude, not dwell on the weather conditions that we've had in 2012. And again, you have to plan and manage for high yield. And 2013 will be no exception. Even though we had a bad year in 2012, we have to have a good strategy out there that takes a systematic or a systematic management approach to trying to raise higher yields.
Okay, Fred, could there be a temptation, could it be a trap to come off a year like this and be thinking, hey, the yields were down, maybe we didn't take as many nutrients out of the soil with a reduced crop, so maybe I don't have to do as much to get ready for next year. Could that be a trap they could fall into? Clearly,
I've heard this question quite a bit. If I didn't use my fertilizer this year, can I apply less next year? And I think that's a bad management decision. You always need to feed that crop at that time that it needs it, and relying completely on last year's fertilizer is going to be a mistake. It is true that there may be some fertilizer left over, but it won't all be available the following year. So once again, you have to hit the reset button, and you have to do those same things that you did this year next year as well.
I think that's going to be one of the key things going into next year. You know, what you need to do to get ready. And what historically, you mentioned this, a lot of times we think we're going to have a good year after a bad year like this, where we assume a lot. But what have we learned, especially from a nutrient standpoint, about coming off of a drought year?
Well, again, we've learned that placing the nutrients where the crop needs them and where the root's going to be is very important when you don't have water to move those nutrients to the crop. And you know, since the high yield crop has such high requirements, managing it and placing it made a huge difference in 2012, and I suspect it's going to be the same thing again in 2013. As we strive for high yields, you know, we were planting more and more seed, and that seed is just removing those nutrients at a greater rate. And so therefore the impact of well-managed crop, particularly feeding the crop, is important. We're taking a feed the crop, not the soil approach, and there's technology to do that, and that's what's going to be part of the key for high yields.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Feed the crop, not the soil.
Yeah, well, if you think about how we manage nutrients, it's on a soil test, and the old adage was it's money in the bank if you can build your soil test levels, but it's more money if you get yield out of every nutrient that you apply. And so by understanding what the crop needs and when it needs it, and taking advantage of today's fantastic application, fertilizer, protection, and genetic technologies, there's a lot of yield to be gained by sort of closing that yield gap.
Adam, that application technology has really come a long way.
It most definitely has. Some of the sub-inch accuracy we have out there with some of the guidance systems, where we can go back and do repeated applications if need be to try and create these specific management zones, like Fred mentioned, where those nutrients need to be in order to get into the plant and become useful and hopefully end up resulting in higher yield.
So Fred, even though some farmers listening may have yields around 20 bushels or less, they shouldn't give up the quest of that 300 bushel corn, because that potential is still out there.
Well, clearly the potential's still there, and there's still a need, and you only need to have a bad year to realize what that need is. I mean, the world can't have a few droughts in a row and still feed itself adequately. So it's even more important next year to be able to hunker down and produce that yield. And
the tools are available for them to get those yields.
Well, and yes, they are, and they're going to learn some of those tools here at the Farm Progress Show. If they visit our presentation, we'll show them what factors affect management. We'll talk about how weather influenced it, and then based on a weather prediction, we'll try and give them some highlights on how they need to be prepared and what they need to do for next year.
Yeah, stop by the Agritain Koch Agronomic Services tent here at the Farm Progress Show and hear Fred and Adam each day with those presentations. Dr. Fred Below and Adam Henniger from the University of Illinois. All right, back with Martin Case. We'll talk about some products that can help you get to that 300 bushel level. That's next on AgriTalk.